Hello, my name is Christopher Miller. I am the Senior Director of Education and Community Engagement here at the National Underground Railroad Freedom Center. Here, our mission is to reveal the story of freedom heroes from the Underground Railroad era to contemporary times to challenge and inspire everyone to take courageous steps for freedom today. In 2020, this audacious mission is still relevant and valid. Today, we are in the Grand Hall practicing social distancing. I'm here with three social justice advocates and leaders here in the community of Cincinnati, Ohio. And so I have with me, without further ado, I have DJ HD. I have also James C. Johnson and Brittany Bibb. Uh, the Underground Railroad serves as an enduring legacy of freedom through courage, cooperation, and perseverance. For those who contributed, and it stands as an example of strength in the resolve of those who fight for equity and justice. So it's very valid and appropriate to hold this conversation here at the National Underground Railroad Freedom Center here on the banks of the Ohio River. And so my first question that I have here today, I'm gonna actually ask DJ HD to kind of kick us off with this discussion, this meaningful discussion. The recent examples of injustice have occurred mostly outside of the city of Cincinnati. So why are cities like Cincinnati holding these protests?
Well, the first thing that I want to say is that that Black flight is not exclusive to, whichever city it's happening in. So just because the murder of Ahmaud Arbery or George Floyd happened in a completely different city, that doesn't mean that the Black people in Wichita might, understand that pain, because we're going through similar things here in Cincinnati with our police department. It was, not too long ago when we witnessed the murder of Sam Dubose right here. And, that pain builds up after a while. And I thought it was very important for us to, organize here directly in Cincinnati, especially with what's been happening with our local police department.
Yeah, so to kind of build on HD's point, he mentioned the assassination of Sam Dubose, and so a lot of times we forget that the officer who murdered Sam Dubose, Ray Tenzing, was not only his charges were dropped, but he also received a settlement from the University of Cincinnati Police Department for around $350,000. And so Cincinnati itself has a long and torturous history of systemic racism. And I think that's what a lot of individuals, a lot of cities in this country and countries around this globe are fighting for. We're trying to combat systemic racism, and that is ingrained in not only the government, but it's ingrained in the implicit bias of all Americans.
Brittany, if you could add to the conversation, do you have a perspective on how impactful and the reason why it's important for Cincinnati to show up in these national protests?
Of course. So I believe, first and foremost, we should stand in solidarity with those in those other cities, right? So it's not only about what's going on in Cincinnati and if it affects us or not, but our Black brothers and sisters, everyone are going through it in Louisville and Minneapolis as the police continue to kill Black people and for ordinary things. And it's not even just police, it's white supremacy overall. So there's unarmed Black people just walking, running, exercising, and citizens and ex-cops are hunting them down and killing them. But again, to build off of both of their points, when the University of Cincinnati's police department killed Sam Dubose, that wasn't the first time that happened, right? That was the fourth unarmed Black man that was killed at the hands of police at the university police department. And the city of Cincinnati's police department also has killed multiple Black people as well. So I feel like the struggle is just continuing. We have been doing this work. We have been protesting and asking for change and demanding change for many years. We're not the first, and we probably won't be the last.
So to expound upon that, I was here in the city. I would say probably about 3 years living here in Cincinnati when the murder of Timothy Thomas took place. And then following that, there was unrest, uprise by the community over this because it had been a series of murderings of unarmed Black men. And I kind of hesitate when I say unarmed because there is a Second Amendment right, and so if you go through, if you're legally, you can carry arms, you can have that. And so I feel I don't need to qualify to say unarmed, but just the killing of Black men. But in 2002, Cincinnati and the community leaders took part in a historical collaborative agreement to find solutions to ongoing issues related to the community policing relations. The agreement organized around 4 primary pillars: evaluation and accountability, community engagement, and action steps. The collaborative agreement has been cited and recommended as a national model for cities across the nation. And so my question is, do you feel it is an appropriate model for other cities to follow, or is more work is needed to this collaborative agreement? And I'll begin with DJ HD, if you could add some perspective from your viewpoint on the collaborative agreement.
So I definitely want to say thank you to Iris Rowley of and the United Black Front for creating, being instrumental in the creation of the collaborative agreement. But even she will tell you to this day that it needs more work. It needs, honestly, not only does it need a refresh because it was created almost 20 years ago, and but not only does it need a refresh, but it kind of exposes the systems of white supremacy around the collaborative agreement that don't support it, because without an economic footprint, the community doesn't have the resources to hold the police accountable. That's difficult work to do without being funded by like from an independent organization standpoint. You need those resources to be able to hire individuals to go over the data, to review body cam footage, to look over direct accounts from people who have interactions with police. That's difficult work to do, and the collaborative agreement can't possibly address each one of those issues. But it is a good starting point to begin to engage with police that could be adopted nationally with a refresh.
Yeah, I definitely agree with HD. So when we look at the last published report, that was back in 2007, and so we have to contextualize and modernize everything that we do. These agreements have to be living documents. There's so many things that have progressed and changed here in the city of Cincinnati and across the country. However, reform almost doesn't eliminate racism. It just makes it a little trickier to hide it, right? It doesn't stop people from, or police officers from, killing Black and brown folks. It just shields it, right? So we look at the development of body cams and how almost every police officer has it, but then we go 100 miles down into Kentucky, in Louisville, Kentucky, and there was a Black person killed at the hands of police officers that just so happens to have their body cams off. And so we have to make sure that, like HD said, we have the not only the financial resources, but we have the manpower, the modernization to make sure that these agreements are relevant in this day and age.
Yes, I think that the collaborative agreement is a model that should have already been followed by others. And at the same time, I think that as they continue to look at that, I loved when James said it's a living document. It should be a living document, because as we keep progressing, that should keep progressing, right? We fund the law and safety of the city of Cincinnati over $150 million. And there are a lot of other entities that equal up to less than that, right? And so if we're thinking about, okay, we need to all have body cams, I think that HD's idea of like having funding so people can actually review that and have more control and give input would be amazing and in the right direction. So I think, you know, taking those resources that are all poured into police departments and things like that for more training, more body cams, things like that. That was something I pushed for at one point. But at the same time, I think that we're moving past that because now they're not using body cams, or they are using body cams, and people are still not getting convicted or held accountable.
I want to kind of extend this conversation a little bit about the collaborative agreement, as well as this idea of a living document. I actually wrote that down as you said that, James, a living document, because I think sometimes, especially, we see laws or policies that are on the book, and we just think, well, that's the law, and what was appropriate or what was the normal 10 years ago, 20 years ago, sometimes 100 years ago, 150 years ago, is not the norm or appropriate for this day and age. And so what do you believe are those barriers for looking at the document from your guys' perspective and it being enhanced? And definitely HD mentioned Iris Roller, who has been a champion for the people for several years. And I see right now in this climate, it's almost of a little bit of the passing of the torch, per se, onto young, energized, motivated activists like yourselves. And so I can see all of you playing an important role in shaping if there is a refresh with this document. And so, I mean, what can you offer any specifics on what you think needs to be particularly refreshed? Anyone can answer this question as well.
Yeah, so I think that when we look at the federal level, so Senator Kamala Harris and Cory Booker have been pushing for a nationwide database of misconduct from police officers. And so that is something that I definitely believe we should be backing. We have to look at 2001, cell phones and smartphones were not really a part of the equation, right? And so if it's not for someone being present, recording the incident, a lot of times we don't know that that misconduct is happening to begin with. And then we also have to address the power that these unions have within the police force. So a major reason why Ray Tenzing was able to get that settlement from the University of Cincinnati Police Department was because of the Fraternal Order of Police. And so we have to have elected officials that have the courage to stand up to these unions, these police unions, and say, hey, you're getting too powerful, you're getting out of hand, and we need to make sure that the power lies within the people, and that is the citizens of each respective city.
So I believe that we should honestly begin reimagining the nature of police and exactly why we have police in the first place, so that we can begin to think of a system where not as many resources are being used directly towards the police department, but are being used to attack the root problems, such as homelessness, such as violence in the communities, and drug abuse. So where we are now, we spend a lot more resources on, policing the problem and punishing those who have the problems, rather than actually attacking the roots of issues. And I think that we go about doing that by like drastically reallocating the funds from the police department and potentially investing them into the actual people that live there, who the police are supposed to be protecting.
Very, very appropriate. I want to move on to this next question I have. And around the country, I've observed that the complexion of these recent protests appears to be a little bit different. There's a significant legacy of white allies from John Brown during the era of slavery, Mary White Ovington with the NAACP, and Leslie W. Dunbar with the civil rights movement of the 1960s. Yet these protests across the country appeared to be much more multicultural than previous protests. Is that a correct? Because you guys are out there. First of all, is that correct? And then secondly, if so, why do you think that is the case? And Brittany, if you could begin with that question, we'll begin with you.
Thank you. So I believe that it is more multicultural. And I think the reason for that is because people are waking up. People are understanding that people that they know, people that they love, are being affected by this every day. I think it was easier also back in the days when we didn't have as much social media to be willfully ignorant and not see what's going on. And so a lot of people are understanding that their voice can actually make a change, right? And so I think that's why we have more outwardly white allies. And I'm really hoping for people to move past that and become accomplices, right? And really be about that. I think it's great for people to start posting on social media, talking in their workplaces, attending protests. But I think there's still more work and advocating that can be done. And then I do want to note at the same time, that doesn't necessarily mean there's less Black people out here doing that work. And that also doesn't mean that white people should have that voice. They should know where they stand, what role they play, and really push to elevate Black voices. There should be at no time where white people are just organizing and demanding things on behalf of Black people because they've never had that lived experience. So I think not even just white people, but people of color who are non-Black, they definitely have a place to support us, and they definitely have been doing that a lot more. And, maybe it's that a lot of people were doing that, but it wasn't the reporting on social media and things like that. But those are my thoughts.
I'll chime in. So Brittany brought up a great point about social media. And I do believe that social media is contributing to the widespread of this new wave of, cameras are getting better and things are getting filmed. And I heard a quote the other day that said, racism isn't getting worse, it's just getting filmed. And for so long, like, people have been able to either not believe us in the beginning, but it went from not believing us to then just ignoring us. And everybody has their own corner of the internet that they can hide in, where, they don't have to see anything that they don't want to see. But with this, with this worldwide pandemic that we're going through right now, we can't be ignored. It's almost like we have nothing to do but to sit down and look at our phones and look at the news, because there's no sports, there's no new entertainment, there's no nightclubs, there's no distractions going on in the world right now that give anybody an excuse to ignore us. And it kind of took that for white supremacy to be displayed on this worldwide stage, where now we have people in Italy who see it. So it's like, at this point, if you don't say anything about it, then you're saying something. Whereas at first you could hide behind that, I didn't even know that, or I didn't see that, or, I live in my own world and I don't have to encounter that. But right now, it's no excuse.
And I think we also have to address how corporate movements have become. So one, I want to give a shout out to the pioneers of the diversity and inclusion space, because they have made it acceptable to talk about race, to talk about what makes us different and oppression within the workplace. One thing that I've noticed is that a lot of what we call cancel culture, right? A lot of individuals on social media are measuring where they spend their dollars based off of where they stand within this movement. And I love that our generation, as millennials, Gen Zers, and the generations that are coming after us, understand the power of the dollar. One thing that I've noticed within social media is that we, as people of color, are Black people of color, should I say, are checking our non-Black friends and saying, hey, if you rock with me, I need to see support. I understand you may not want to protest, but I need to see some type of monetary support, when donating to bailout funds. I need to see you donating resources as it relates to waters and snacks for those who are protesting. And so it's do something, right? Let me know what side of history you're going to stand on. And I'm glad that Brittany spoke on the organization of our white allies. And I heard a great statement the other day by a white ally to other white allies. And he said that white voices should be loud. However, they should not be louder. And so I think a lot of times in movements throughout the American history, we tend to whitewash movements, whether we talk about women's suffrage, whether we talk about LGBTQ movements, and even now Black Lives Matter. When we allow the majority to control the narrative, whether it is intentional or not, we lose the base, we lose the momentum of where we're going to allow us to achieve true inclusivity. And I think that's what we're fighting for. We need our white allies. We need all hands on deck as it relates to accomplishing this mission. However, we have to understand that we need Black faces at the forefront of this movement, and it can't be drowned out by white noise.
Thank you. Thank you very much for this very powerful. I like the aspect allies to accomplices. I think that's a very powerful way to look at that. And we do appreciate our white brothers and sisters, all our brothers and sisters, people of color that are in the struggle. And I want to talk about, we touched on it a little bit. This year, 2020 marks the 100th anniversary of women's suffrage. It's also the 150th anniversary as well for Black men being enfranchised, given the access to the ballot. But there is a remarkable legacy of women lending their voices to confront injustices. From Mariah Stewart, I should say, the earliest known African-American woman or woman in general to lecture in public on political issues, to Cincinnati's beloved Marion Spencer. African-American women have played a critical role in protests and in movements. And I'm going to ask you this question because you are the woman on our panel. Can you discuss the role of women during these protests here in 2020 and other recent in recent history, starting with the Black Lives Matters movement that was, began with a woman leading that charge. And so can you discuss a little bit about the role of women in these modern day protests and movements?
I would say that women have always been at the forefront of movement. So even before Black Lives Matter, but if we talking about Black Lives Matter and things like that, we are oppressed because we're Black, we're oppressed because we're women. And then even a lot of Black women that are leading are queer, right? And so having all of those identities, I think, gives people a better understanding of who all needs to be free, right? And so I think it's easier for us to imagine until all Black people are free, we are not free. And I think, me as a Black woman, I love my Black men, my brothers. I have 3 brothers and a sister. And so I just grew up around a lot of Black men, and it's disheartening to see what's going on. And I also think that Black women are here to remind Black men that there's also Black women in the struggle, right? So we're out and we're protesting for George Floyd, but we're also protesting for Breonna Taylor and Tony McDade, right? The struggle is not over just because George Floyd's officers were convicted. Breonna Taylor's killers are still out, probably enjoying their life. No one has been charged with anything. And so I know there's still a lot of unrest in Louisville, Kentucky right now. And even during that, another Black man was killed. So I personally have been witnessing Black women leading the charge. Sometimes they are acknowledged and sometimes they are not. But I think the thing that I love is that we still keep pushing. It's not about the spotlight. For me, I don't even like speaking, but I also know that it's important that I'm here and I'm represented, right? I have a panel of 4 of us, and there's 3 Black men. I know that a woman's voice is needed in this movement.
I'll say this. I don't believe Black women have a specific targeted role in this. I think that Black women can and always have been able to do whatever it is that they want to do. In this specific example, in the protest here, the first person who I called was Iris Rowley. The second person who I called was Brittany Bibb. The third person who I called does not want to be named, but it was a Black woman as well. And without them, none of it would have happened. Even during the entire event, where it was a little bit overwhelming because it was the first time for us all, being in this particular space. I had to lean on both of them, all 3 of them, honestly, to help with the organization and the execution of making sure everything was peaceful and organized and and going straight. But like I said, there's no specific role for Black women, and I want to thank them for every role that they've taken so far, and including the mothers who are raising Black men right now.
James, is there anything you want to add to as you see out there? Why? Because I know you've been busy. I have. There hasn't been a rally or protest I haven't seen your face at. Not one.
Yes,
And so, I mean, can you express about the love and support and the fight that you see in our sisters that are out there at these protests and rallies?
Yeah, definitely. And I'll make it quick. I am so excited. Like Brittany's shirt says, this movement needs to love on Black women because they are the ones that are going to push this thing forward. And I think this is the time, this is the generation to do it. We don't have the cultural barriers that we did in the civil rights movement or the women's suffrage movement as it relates to religion. Our generation is not confined to a monolithic approach. And so women now, I believe, have the access to be more visible than ever. However, we still do have the cultural dynamics of men in general feeling a sense of entitlement to lead, even when they may not be the most qualified. And so one thing I want to applaud all of the Black women that have been working day in and day out, not just within this movement, but movements past. And I encourage them to continue to move forward and raise up a new generation of specifically Black women.
This year, 2020, marks the centennial of the 19th Amendment, the culmination of women's suffrage. The 2020 also this year marks the 150th anniversary of the 15th Amendment, which enfranchised Black men. The theme, the annual Black history theme, is African Americans and the vote. The theme speaks to the ongoing struggle on the part of both Black men and Black women for the right to vote. What are the current concerns about voting? And what does the aspect of voting play in the unrest occurring across the nation today? What part of the protest that is taking place where we are promoting and illuminating the power of the vote? And if we can begin with James, if you don't mind, your perspective on this.
Yeah, so first, let me say that voting is essential, not just within the Black community, but within the fabric and the evolution of this country. And so I will never tell anybody not to vote. However, one thing that has been a common theme of debate is what is specifically the Democratic Party doing to return the investment that Black folks have made within the party. And so there's been a few celebrities, Black celebrities, that have been saying, hey, we want something in exchange for our vote. We want a Black agenda as it relates to your platform, more specifically Joe Biden, with him being the Democratic nominee. And I think what a lot of these celebrities are saying is that we want the party to represent the people of the party and not just the leaders of white America. Meaning we don't want our political candidates to all be old white men. We want diversity within the people that are representing us. And so one thing that I believe is a common theme is pushing out protesters to register to vote, understanding that a lot of people have been purged. And so voter suppression, purging is a real thing. And so every time I have an opportunity to check to see if I'm still registered to vote, I do that. But in a grander scheme, I think that the Democratic Party owes it to Black folks to represent us and our interests. And so, to be honest, I am an advocate for having a Black woman as vice president. Joe Biden has already said that he's going to have a woman as his VP pick. And I believe not only just with the current state of the country right now, but with also Joe Biden's record, his voting record, he owes it to Black folks, specifically Black women, to have someone like them represent them in the White House. And so that is my opinion. I am not speaking on behalf of the Democratic Party or Black folks everywhere. However, I do believe, given Joe Biden's track record, we need a Black woman as vice president.
And I want to also talk about, especially within our community, we do focus in on that office, but we also want to pay close attention to our local and state officials, elected officials, and making sure that those offices are very important. Brittany, can you add to your perspective when it comes to voting and how that impacts about bringing accountability of justice as we move forward?
Yeah, I was actually just going to mention that I think a lot of people have an issue because we're picking, right, the lesser of two evils when we have Democratic and Republicans at the forefront of the presidential race. And I also think that people don't always know that their votes matter in other times, right? Because we have local and state officials that need to be elected as well, need to represent us. And then furthermore, if they know that we are always coming out to vote, then we have more power, right? That still doesn't give us economic power, but we have the voting power to hold those officials accountable. And so I think one of those issues is just picking between the presidential candidates. People don't feel like it really matters. And then I think the other is just not knowing the importance of those smaller but still important elections at the local and state levels. And then I think the other thing is Black people have been out and we have voted historically since we were given that right. And that hasn't changed everything, right? So there are still a lot of racist policies and things like that, that even though we vote on it, it might seem like it helps us a little bit, but it's always loopholes and things that people bring up when it's time to fight for justice. They're like, yeah, we gave you, let's say, the right to use the same restroom, but there's still a hold on that and there's still something else. And so I think that's another issue. I want to point out that I was on a call with Ms. Rowley, and she was talking about the collaborative agreement came about through a lawsuit. And so I just think it's important for us to know that protesting is important, voting is important, but there are also other ways to get things done. So I think really what's important is for us to know that it's a combination. And it's not just protesting, it's not just lawsuits, it's not just voting, that it's really going to take a lot of different things in the movement to make a greater change and have a big impact.
Brittany brought up a great point about how voting is not the end all be all, but it is very important. I also believe that voting is very important, but like she said, I believe that there are a multitude of things that we can be doing to push our movement forward, like mobilizing and protesting and, pursuing things legally. I think that policy is very difficult, as we've learned here recently, as we were trying to, brush up on, a lot of the policies that we have here now. And what, like she said, we're realizing that there are loopholes in every single law and every single, revised code of the Ohio law that, you know, that allow these people to oppress us. And it's unfortunate, but I think that, you know, policy is the first step. You know, getting policy change is the first step. But I think we need to, like I said, reimagine the world and the systems that exist in this world so that, you know, we can prevent these problems from happening at a root level, at a psychological level. You know, what can we do as a community to show Black faces and, you know, prove Black humanity to people who, you know, inherently just don't like us? Like, what can we do past, you know, getting that bill signed? How can we, you know, display, you know, Black humanity on a worldwide national level so that, you know, we can be viewed as not always a threat? That's my overall goal. But I definitely think voting is important, and it's only, you know, one aspect and the first step of the movement.
And to add to HD's point, we need more organizations to raise up officials or potential officials that look like us and represent us. And so I believe that we need to not only elect Black and brown people into public office, but we need to hold them accountable once they're in there as well. And so when I ask my community, hey, what is it about voting that, you know, turns you off? A lot of times is most people don't understand how the government works. Most people don't even know that there's three branches of governments, right? And so it's because the government systems, it's not sexy. It's not a trending topic unless something like Black Lives Matter happens, right? And so we need to ensure that civics is built into early elementary education. And so whether that is voting, having a pseudo election for elementary students, or having student body presidents in the elementary experience, I believe that builds in the habit of voting for someone that represents your interests. But I also believe that we need more nonprofits, we need more organizations to prepare the next generation of elected leaders. And they shouldn't just be people who can afford the vote. They need to be individuals that are from the hood. They need to be individuals that are from urban America, that understand how the systems work that affect Black and brown people. And so when you have somebody from your neighborhood being groomed essentially to represent you, you have a lot more trust. And not only will you vote for them, but you're also going to donate to them because you know your money is going to go in a place that will be manifested for your investment.
I am definitely an advocate for education. I take issue with our educational system. I don't think that it does a good enough job in producing critical thinking people, citizens, as well as to them to be more civic minded and having a greater understanding of policies and how our government is working. And so I definitely hope that there's areas and changes with that. There's And so with that being said, you know, I know that we talked about the Black Lives Matter movement. There's this imagery, Black Lives Matter being, you know, posted everywhere. And I'm curious as far as to know about how are historical organizations showing up at these protests, or are they showing up at all? I had a civil rights icon who will remain nameless once told me a few years back that that they struggled with understanding why there was a need for a Black Lives Matter movement when you have these historical organizations, you know, like the NAACP, the Urban League, and so forth. And so my question is, as emerging leaders and activists, what is your perspective on the current state of those historical organizations? And are they being represented at these protests? How supportive are they? Have they been, or are they showing up at all? And I can start with you, HD.
I'll say that I received a lot of support from the historic uh, organizations, specifically the United Black Front, which, you know, I wouldn't consider historic, but because they've been, actively moving recently. But the United Black Front and the NAACP, when I put out the beacon, they both came and spoke on behalf of the protest that I organized alongside Brittany Bibb. And I've been seeing them out there in the front lines. But what's happening, as I view it, is there's a changing of the guard. And to answer that question, why does there need to be a Black Lives Matter movement when there's already historical organizations? Is because the state of things are changing, and we never need to shut out new ideas from coming to the table. And a lot of times when we have these built up systems, they can become a bit bureaucratic, and they can have you know things to lose that other people don't. So people have to come into the movement at whichever level they're comfortable. So a lot of people might not be comfortable with the bureaucracy of a NAACP, but they're more comfortable coming into it at a Black Lives Matter. And other people who know systems and policy, they might be more comfortable working with NAACP because they see things that I may not see because I'm so used to moving here at the ground level. So I think overall there's been a showing of solidarity between pretty much every Black organization at this point. Like I mentioned earlier, I reached out to the Black Panther Party, um, the Nation of Islam, um, NAACP, United Black Front, and we were well represented.
I would agree with DJ HD. Like he said, we produced that protest, and so there were people represented. But what I'll do is go back to my time as an undergraduate student and give a smaller scale example. So I was a member of the United Black Student Association, and I remember back in 2013, we were protesting because there was a racist cartoon made about the Black Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences. And so some people were already a part of the United Black Student Association. They felt very at home, like they were a member, but there were some people who were not connected and already a part of it. And so as time went on, the second time around, when Sam DuBose was killed, even though I had always been a part of the United Black Student Association, we thought it was very important to kind of move as a movement and not as a specific organization. So although I was a part of that and it was at my heart, we brought other organizations to the table that were at the school. And then we also brought anybody else. So if you felt like you were not a part of the UC African Student Association or NAACP, we brought you to that table under kind of a collective. And I feel like that's the same thing that is kind of happening. It's not that NAACP isn't a part of it. It's just that it's a collective movement. So they might still have a voice at the table. They might still be leading, but I think it also gives other people who have not historically been a part of those the opportunity to feel included and be included and have a voice. And then later down the line, they might meet people from the NAACP or another organization and say, hey, I really align with your other values outside of this. But I think the biggest thing for us now is to have a united Black agenda so that everybody can feel and everybody can be a part of that together. So I think it's more so that we don't necessarily need one organization at the forefront, but not negating the fact that they're important in this struggle.
And as a due paying member of the NAACP, I do believe that the organization, NAACP and other organizations like the Urban League are present, not just with the city of Cincinnati, but across the country. However, what I do see and know is that when you have organizations like that is multi-generational, a lot of times it is the older generation, specifically those who are coming out of the civil rights movement, that are still in power. When you look at the national board of the NAACP, majority of them are older. However, I can say the organizations have been working intentionally to add more younger people a part of that conversation and as board members. And so I do want to give a shout out to the national president, Derek Johnson, and then the also national chair of the NAACP Youth and College Division, Tiffany Lofton, because they've been very intentional in making sure that the message of the NAACP is inclusive to all generations. One thing that I will say, though, is that we have to use this moment to drive more volunteers, more leaders to these organizations, because if not, this is the only time, in my opinion, that the organizations have a time to capture this next generation of leaders. And if we don't get them now, if we don't get leaders like myself, Brittany, and HD, I'm a part of these organizations, we're going to miss the millennial Gen Z agenda. And I can say that we are a little more militant than the infrastructure of these organizations. And so if we want to see the NAACP progress, if we want to see the Urban League progress, we're going to need people that think and look like us as it relates to our youth in positions of influence. And so I am an advocate specifically for those who want to be protected by an organization and may not want to be in the grassroots of things. If a lot of young professionals, they're looking to get involved, I encourage you to volunteer for your local NAACP unit, register people to vote, hand out waters. And that's a way that you can contribute to the cause and still be down for the movement without the repercussions, I guess you can say, unfortunately, of corporate America. And so I really want to encourage a lot of these established organizations to use this moment to collect more volunteers and identify potential leadership.
And then I just did want to add in one more thing. I think while it's important that we recognize those historical organizations, there are still a lot of new organizations emerging that may have come about in the past 10 or 20 years, right? So there's BYP 100, there's the Movement for Black Lives and things like that, that also exist. So I think while it's important to recognize that those historical organizations are being represented and are at the table, I think a lot of those other organizations, and I know a lot of those other organizations, are doing the work and being represented as an organization. So some of those young people might be in NAACP and something else, but some of them may just identify more with a BYP 100 and what they stand for.
I really do like what I'm hearing. This is a spirit of inclusion. It's a spirit of diversity. Even when we talk about matters of Blackness, there's diversity within that. And I think that's very, very important. And everyone can find their place in this movement to bring about change. Because what we want to do is we want to inspire change, but we need change agents to do that. And people need to come show up in their authentic selves. And so that might be revealed in being a member of the NAACP or some of these other organizations, but be committed to the work of bringing about change and progress to uplift and bring justice to our country. And with that being said, justice is something that our institution here at the National Underground Railroad Freedom Center is big on, because I've heard several times and several public officials say that we are a country of laws. And I struggle with that, because once upon a time, yes, we're a country of laws, but slavery was law. It was lawful. I believe we promote in being a country of justice, being more sounded of justice. And one of the crusaders of justice was Ida B. Wells Barnett. She led the anti-lynching campaign movement. That led to the Dyer anti-lynching bill, which was first introduced in 1918. Yet this past February, in 2020, the House passed a bill that would make lynching a federal hate crime. It's alarming how long it has taken to make racial violence a federal crime. And although there isn't a presence of a noose when it comes to the killing of George Floyd, and understanding that this what's going on is it's more than George Floyd. It's about Breonna Taylor. It's about Ahmaud Arbery. It's about going all the way back to Trayvon Martin as well. The countless of individuals that have lost their lives senselessly to misconduct and racism and discrimination as well. So with dealing with George Floyd and just the optics of it, do you view it as a modern day lynching? And if so, a second question to that, what does justice look like in your perspective? And so it's kind of like a two-part question with that. If you think that what took place in Minneapolis was it was a lynching, and then justice is needed that where we're working for, what does justice look like to you? And we can begin with HD if you don't mind.
So I definitely view many of the recent killings that were happening on tape as modern day lynchings. And what's worse is that it's become more widespread. You know, it's not limited to the neighborhood where it's happening. It's like, you know, and these videos are gonna replay forever. You know, once they hit the internet, you know, they're not going anywhere anytime soon. They can live on somebody's phone for the rest of their life. Some people, you know, imagine having to, you know, watch the viewing of Eric Garner as his child watched it. She said she actually mentioned that she hadn't watched the video until about a year and a half later. And it wasn't on purpose. She had avoided it for an entire year, and then when she finally watched it, it just reopened old wounds. So I definitely view this as a modern day lynching, and if not, you know, something that actually affects us in maybe even worse ways, or you know, a more widespread way. You know, I wasn't there for the lynchings, but you know, all I can say is what I've seen. But to answer the question of what does justice look like, that's a philosophical question that's been asked for years, but you know, and it's a very difficult answer. What I can say is what justice does not look like from what I've seen. And nowhere in my definition of justice includes like 1% of the population owning 41% of the resources. Nowhere in my definition of justice includes Black lives being disposable. Nowhere in my definition of justice includes, you know, removing a child's innocence because, you know, you have to give them that discussion on what it means to be Black. So what is justice? I think justice is a system that, you know, promotes fairness amongst individuals and accounts for the natural inequalities that are beyond our control.
The recent killings, and even back before everything was on video, that is a form of lynching. There are people that enjoy that and believe that Black people should be killed for smoking cigarettes, running, having Skittles, etc., whatever they're doing. And I think I visited the um, museum in Alabama that was from the Equal Justice Initiative. And there were accounts where white women would, you know, be upset or annoyed by a Black person, and then they were killed. And I feel like that same sentiment is lynching, right? They're saying we can't do anything. If we make you a little bit upset, we're going to kill you straight out, or call the police because we know they will kill you, and they have been able to get away with that a lot more, right? We saw the
Somewhat
woman.
similar, like with Amy Cooper, and what happened, you know, a few
Yep,
weeks
that's
back.
exactly where I was going. I was going to say, like, somebody was bird watching, enjoying their life, and corrected somebody else for breaking the law, and they had the nerve to say, "Oh, I'm going to call the police on you," and then cry and apologize and get their dog back, right? So I would definitely say that lynching is still a thing. I don't even know if passing the law about it will make a real change, and make people be discouraged from doing that, because we see continually it doesn't always matter what the law is. You can see somebody literally kill another person and still walk away free and get paid for all that time that they missed at work. And so my definition of justice is Black people, and I'm going to talk about Black people specifically. My definition for justice for Black people is us being able to be free, no matter what we're doing, not having to walk down the street wondering if we're going to be the next hashtag. Also, that includes, having equal access to education so that we can, get into whatever school we want to, not having to rely on student loans and things like that, because I feel like a lot of times we are able to get a little bit ahead, but there's so many other burdens that we have. And so I like to say, I can rely on my parents for economics, and I can always count on them, but there are so many other Black people that have to work hard and then provide for the rest of their family. Until I can have enough generational wealth to where no one has to worry and I don't have to worry, I'm not free. If I have to decide between, am I going to get coffee, or if I'm going to, provide for somebody or have a little fun or pay my rent, then I'm not free. If I have to think about every move that I make, and not be able to, live like a white man with no worries, honestly, then I'm not free. And so I think that justice is breaking down all of those barriers, and not having to be lifted up to see over the fence. There should be no fence. And those are my thoughts.
So when we look at how lynching is defined, we would assume that there is a noose. However, in this day and age, I would consider these incidents, both George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery, specifically examples of a modern day lynching. And the reason I say that, anytime an officer or any individual is connected to a white supremacy group, I believe that their actions is connected to hate. Therefore, these murders I would define as hate crimes. And I think it's as simple as that. There's no disputing that those individuals are connected to white supremacy groups. And when we look at George Zimmerman, right, he has literally described that experience as a way of him executing his feelings for, or the distaste for Black folks. And so anytime that individuals are connected to a white supremacy group, or Nazi affiliate, I do believe that they should be considered hate crimes and modern day lynching. And for me, I consider justice right now as reallocating the funds of the police force. When you have public safety line items in the budget making up 3/4 of the city's budget, we have a problem. When education is not receiving, when you have elementary kids trying to get an education without air condition, we have a problem, especially when police forces are having especially when police forces are driving around in Teslas, and you have kids that are 6, 7, and 8 years old trying to learn with their air condition. That is an issue. And so that's what I believe justice looks like. I believe it's addressing the implicit bias, not just within the police force, but also criminal justice system entirely. So a lot of times we focus on the police brutality aspect or police terrorism, but we don't acknowledge how racist the systems of the criminal justice system is. And so whether it's judge, whether it's prosecutors, I believe they all should go through implicit bias training, and acknowledge and pull out those associated specifically with white supremacy groups. And I think at the end of the day, man, we want equity. When people ask me, hey, what is the Black agenda? I don't believe the Black agenda is saying, oh, we want to be ahead of the line, right? I believe that the Black agenda is simply, we want equal access. Upon my birth, I want the opportunity to be as great as my white counterparts. And it shouldn't matter about the zip code. It shouldn't matter if I was raised by a single parent or both parents. It shouldn't matter. It should matter about my drive, my ambition, and my determination to be successful and make a name for myself and my community. And so that is what justice looks like to me. It's the reallocation of funds as relates to the police department. It is addressing the implicit bias in the criminal justice system entirely, but ultimately it's equity across this country.
So I know our time is about to run short, and I want to thank all of you for participating. I want to give you the opportunity as well to any last call to action as you see fit that you think you want to make sure. If you can make it brief, that would be greatly appreciated. But any call to action, because there's going to be several people who are going to have the opportunity to see this discussion. And we bring about change. We want to bring about accountability. We want to bring about justice. We want to bring about empathy when it comes to the concerns that are facing us as a country, but particularly how it faces confronting us as African Americans. And so, HG, if we can start with you, go to James, and then Brittany.
The main thing that I want to say is don't stop. Don't stop agitating. Keep agitating the system. You know, I've been seeing over the last few weeks, I've seen the men in suits protests. I've seen the women in heels protests. I've seen the all white protest, the the all black, the army fatigue protest, the armed protest. I think what you're doing is important. And while I, may or may not agree that, that's the best way of going about doing it, but I love what I'm seeing, and I love that people are continuing to, organize and mobilize and let their voices be heard on this issue. So moving forward, just continue to keep doing that work, and don't settle for, a smooth policy change here or there. Let's not stop until we get full justice, full equality, full, reimaginings of the system across the board, from education to tech to public safety to affordable housing to student loans to, every aspect of this system that affects us negatively. Let's not stop until we fix it.
And so whether you're white or black, I believe this is the time to mobilize, get connected with someone, some affinity group, some organization, some entity, to make sure that you're using your time, talent, or treasure. This is the time not to be a social justice warrior and just use your Twitter fingers. This is the time to put your feet where your thumbs are. Right? We need to be out in the streets. And if you don't believe in protesting, if you don't want to put your efforts towards protesting, find your niche. Whether you are a writer, whether you like research, whether you just want to fold pamphlets, right? Donate your time, treasure, or talents to some type of organization, some entity, to make sure that this movement is going forward and is sustainable.
My call to action would just be keep moving forward so that we can break these chains, right? There is a lot of change that needs to happen. And I say, rather than shooting for what you think can happen, because they'll never give you what you shoot for anyway, you need to shoot for what you want and what you need. I think a lot of times people get caught up in what they can't see, right? And so if nobody's ever done it, it's kind of like, oh, I don't know if I should push for that. But I think we should really challenge ourselves to think why we're pushing for certain changes, what that means, and then is there something further we can push for? And if you don't think that that can work, let's think about how we can get that to work, or why that doesn't work currently, and break down those systems. So I would really just encourage people to continue to research, continue to have dialogue, and continue to press on your politicians, elected officials, police, etc., to ensure that we really can make a change, because it's very important that we're out here protesting. And I think the overall goal of protesting is to show that we are solid in numbers, but we really need to be pushing in those protests for a certain agenda, right? And so I think our next step is to really get on the same page for as much as we can and continue to press forward, and utilize those people who are out on the streets, protesting and informing them about things, whether that's policy or whether that's what we want to change, through another avenue. So that is what my call to action would be.
Chris, I just want to add one more thing. If you absolutely don't know what to do and you're watching this, donate to the National Underground Railroad Freedom Center. I guarantee you, your dollars will be going towards the movement and progressing the lives of Black and brown people across this country.
Thank you, James. I appreciate that. We appreciate that. I appreciate all of you and the work that you are doing. My prayers, blessings, and encouragement goes out to you and everyone who is carrying this spirit of justice in their hearts. And so my parting words is to think about this spirit of justice and where it comes from. A good friend of mine, colleague, it was our last lecturer, freedom lecturer here at the National Underground Railroad Freedom Center. Her name is Dr. Kelly Carter Jackson. She is the author of this book here called Force and Freedom. Very powerful book, very relevant and timely. She introduced me to someone who I never came across, abolitionist and minister by the name of Joshua Easton. And in 1837, I repeat, in 1837, at an anti-slavery society meeting in Boston, he said these words. He says, abolitionists may attack slaveholding, but there is a danger still that the spirit of slavery will survive in the form of prejudice after the system is overturned. Our warfare ought not to be against slavery alone, but against the spirit which makes color a mark of degradation. A spirit that makes color a mark of degradations, the spirit of slavery. And so we see the spirit of slavery is still alive, and it exists in many different forms. It is revealed and manifested in many different ways. And so we understand that when we're out here fighting for justice, we are battling that spirit of slavery that still exists in 2020. And so we want people to have that same spirit of justice. We understand it will not be all, because some people probably benefit from a lack of justice. They may benefit from things being unequal. And so if you're about equality, or if you're about equity, if you're about justice, we want your collective energy and focus to bring about a change for the generations to come. I thank once again HD, James C. Johnson, and Brittany Bibb for joining us down here in the Grand Hall at the National Underground Railroad Freedom Center. I am Christopher Miller, Senior Director of Education and Community Engagement. Thank you for taking the time to listen to our discussion here today. Much appreciated.